By noon, he was on the prairie again, and the dust to the north was stretched out along the edge of the earth. By evening, the first of a drove of cattle came into view. Rangy, vicious beasts with enormous horn spreads. That night, he sat in the herder's camp and ate beans, and pilot bread and herd of life on the trail. They were coming down from Abilene, 40 days out, headed for the markets in Louisiana, followed by packs of wolves, coyotes, Indians. Cattle groaned about them for miles. In the dark, they asked him no questions, a ragged lot themselves. Crossbreed some, free niggers, an Indian or two. I had my outfit stole, he said. They nodded in the firelight. They got everything I had. I ain't even got a knife. You might could sign on with us. We lost 2 men. Turned back to go to California. I'm headed yon way. I guess you might be going to California, the own self. I might. I ain't decided. Them boys was with us, fell in with a bunch from Arkansas. They was headed down for Bayer, going to pull for Mexico in the west. I'll bet them. Old boys is in Bayer drinking, they brains out. I'll bet old Lonnie's done topped ever whore in town. How far is it to Bayer? It's about 2 days. It's further than that. More like 4, I'd say. How would a man go if he'd a mind to? You cut straight south. You ought to hit the road about half a day. You going to Bayer? I might do, you see. Old Lonnie down there. You tell him get a piece from me. Tell him old Oren. He'll buy the A drink if he ain't blowed all his money in. In the morning, they ate flapjacks with molasses, and the herders saddled up and moved on. When he found his mule, there was a small fiber bag tied to the animal's rope, and inside the bag, there was a cup full of dried beans and some peppers and an old green river knife with a handle made of string. He saddled up the mule's back galled and balding, the hooves cracked, the ribs like fish bones. They hobbled on across the endless plain. He came upon Bea in the evening of the 4th day, and he sat the tattered mule on a low rise and looked down at the town, the quiet adobe houses, the line of green oaks and cottonwoods that marked the course of the river, the plaza filled with wagons with their Osnaburg covers, and the whitewashed public buildings and the Moorish church, dome rising from the trees, and the garrison and the tall stone powder house in the distance. A light breeze stirred the fronds of his hat, his matted, greasy hair. His eyes lay dark and tunneled in a caved and haunted face, and a foul stench rose from the wells of his boot tops. The sun was just down, and to the west lay reefs of blood red, clouds up out of which rose little desert nighthawks like fugitives from some great fire at the earth's end. He spat a dry white spit and clumped the cracked wooden stirrups against the mule's ribs, and they staggered into motion again. He went down a narrow sandy road, and as he went, he met a dead cart bound out with a load of corpses, a small bell tolling the way, and a lantern swinging from the gate. 3 men sat on the box, not unlike the dead themselves, or spirit folk. So white they were with lime, and nearly phosphorescent in the dusk. A pair of horses drew the cart, and they went on up the road in a faint miasma of carbolic, and passed from sight. He turned and watched them go. The naked feet of the dead jostled stiffly from side to side. It was dark when he entered the town, attended by barking dogs, faces parting the curtains in the lamplit windows, the light clatter of the mule's hooves echoing in the little empty streets. The mule sniffed the air and swung down an alleyway into a square where there stood in the starlight a well, a trough, a hitching rail. The kid eased himself down and took the bucket from the stone coping and lowered it into the well. A light splash echoed. He drew the bucket, water dripping in the dark. He dipped the gourd and drank, and the mule nuzzled his elbow. When he'd done, he set the bucket in the street and sat on the coping of the well and watched the mule drink from the bucket. He went on through the town leading the animal. There was no one about. By and by, he entered a plaza, and he could hear guitars and a horn. At the far end of the square, there were lights from a cafe, and laughter, and high-pitched cries. He led the mule into the square, and up the far side past a long portico toward the lights. There was a team of dancers in the street, and they wore gaudy costumes and called out in Spanish. He and the mule stood at the edge of the lights and watched. Old men sat along the tavern wall, and children played in the dust. They wore strange costumes, all. The men in dark flat-crowned hats, white nightshirts, trousers that buttoned up the outside leg, and the girls with garish painted faces and tortoiseshell combs in their blue-black hair. The kid crossed the street with the mule and tied it and entered the cafe. A number of men were standing at the bar, and they quit talking when he entered. He crossed the polished clay floor past a sleeping dog that opened one eye and looked at him, and he stood at the bar and placed both hands on the tiles. The barman nodded to him. "Dig 'em," he said. "I ain't got no money, but I need a drink. I'll fetch out the slops, or mop the floor, or whatever." The barman looked across the room to where two men were playing dominoes at a table. "Abuelito," he said. Doc, the older of the two, raised his head. "¿Qué dice el muchacho?" The old man looked at the kid and turned back to his dominoes. The barman shrugged his shoulders. The kid turned to the old man. "You speak American," he said. The old man looked up from his play. He regarded the kid without expression. "Tell him I'll work for a drink. I ain't got no money." The old man thrust his chin and made a clucking noise with his tongue. The kid looked at the barman. The old man made a fist with the thumb, pointing up and the little finger down, and tilted his head back and tipped a phantom drink down his throat. "Quiere echarse una copa a Said, pero no puede pagar." The men at the bar watched. The barman looked at the kid. "Quiere trabajo," said the old man. "Croyons sabi." He turned back to his pieces and made his play without further consultation. "Quieres trabajar," said one of the men at the bar. They began to laugh. "What are you laughing at?" said the boy. They stopped. Some looked at him. Some pursed their mouths or shrugged. The boy turned to the bartender. "You got something I could do for a couple of drinks. I know damn good and well." One of the men at the bar said something in Spanish. The boy glared at them. They winked one to the other. They took up their glasses. He turned to the barman again. His eyes were dark and narrow. "Sweep the floor," he said. The barman blinked. The kid stepped back and made sweeping motions, a pantomime that bent the drinkers in silent mirth. "Sweep," he said, pointing at the floor. "No." "Está sucio," said the barman. He swept again. "Sweep, goddamn it," he said. The barman shrugged. He went to the end of the bar and got a broom and brought it back. The boy took it and went on to the back of the room, a great hall of a place. He swept in the corners where potted trees stood silent in the dark. He swept around the spittoons, and he swept around the players at the table, and he swept around the dog. He swept along the front of the bar, and when he reached the place where the drinkers stood, he straightened up and leaned on the broom and looked at them. They conferred silently among themselves, and at last one took his glass from the bar and stepped away. The others followed. The kid swept past them to the door. The dancers had gone. The music. Across the street sat a man on a bench dimly lit in the doorlight from the cafe. The mule stood where he'd tied it. He tapped the broom on the steps and came back in and took the broom to the corner where the barman had gotten it. Then he came to the bar and stood. The barman ignored him. The kid rapped with his knuckles. The barman turned and put one hand on his hip and pursed his lips. "How about that drink now?" said the kid. The barman stood. The kid made the drinking motions that the old man had made, and the barman flapped his towel idly at him. "Endel," he said. He made a shooing motion with the back of his hand. The kid's face clouded. "You son of a bitch," he said. He started down the bar. The barman's expression did not change. He brought up from under the bar an old-fashioned military pistol with a flintlock and shoved back the cock with the heel of his hand. A great wooden clicking in the silence. The clicking of glasses all down the bar. Then the scuffling of chairs pushed back by the players at the wall. The kid froze. "Old man," he said. The old man didn't answer. There was no sound in the cafe. The kid turned to find him with his eyes. "Está borracho," said the old man. The boy watched the barman's eyes. The barman waved the pistol toward the door. The old man spoke to the room in Spanish. Then he spoke to the barman. Then he put on his hat and went out. The barman's face drained. When he came around the end of the bar, he had laid down the pistol, and he was carrying a bunk starter in one hand. The kid backed to the center of the room, and the barman labored over the floor toward him like a man on his way to some chore. He swung twice at the kid, and the kid stepped twice to the right. Then he stepped backward. The barman froze. The kid boosted himself lightly over the bar and picked up the pistol. No one moved. He raked the frizzen open against the bar top and dumped the priming out and laid the pistol down again. Then he selected a pair of full bottles from the shelves behind him and came around the end of the bar with one in each hand.